This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. Well, welcome back to Political Theater. It has been sort of a momentous week here in the nation's capital. We just had the House of Representatives pass the budget resolution, which will unlock a lot of the special magical powers of reconciliation, which basically means you don't have to worry about a filibuster in the Senate. We can get a little bit to that later in a future podcast because this is going to play out over the next several weeks. But we've also, just had a ton of other news that's been going on, particularly with tariffs. They were on, they were off. We still have a lot of lawsuits that are playing out over the administration and what they're trying to do with the federal workforce or on immigration policy or what have you. And I thought that this was just a good time to check in with our former colleague and friend, Christina Bellantoni, former editor-in-chief of Roll Call, but now who is a professor at the University of Southern California and a director of its Annenberg Media program, about a column she wrote for Roll Call and also what she's seeing on the ground in California, which for the most part has typically positioned itself as the counterweight to a lot of Trump's policies. So Christina, forgive the long-winded, gas-baggy introduction there.
That's normal.
And welcome back to Political Theater. It's great to see you. Great
to be here.
So yeah, your column, for those watching on YouTube, I could just hold it up here. It's for the dead tree, but it's online on rollcall.com. We published it on Tuesday. Is about some of the differences that you've seen in your role in California, observing California politics, the difference that a lot of California Democrats who fancy themselves sort of as the resistance to Donald Trump and Donald Trump's presidency, the difference between 2017, 2018, the first term, and now, and also like there has been a little difference in your professional role. At the time of Trump won, at least at the beginning of it, you were at the Los Angeles Times as a politics editor. Now you're training that next generation of journalists as a professor. So you also have a different vantage point of your own on that. But let's talk about what made you think that this was a time to do this column, because there's so much going on. It's hard to keep track of what's going on with Trump in particular. I'm getting Trump 1.0 flashbacks a lot of the time because there's just so much news. What made you think let's step back and look at what California is doing now compared to what it was doing a few years ago?
Yeah, this is a good example for training young students too, because I started with the theory, 123 lawsuits in the first term. Surely we're not anywhere close to that. So I actually started it out, there were 123 lawsuits over the course of 4 years. By this pace, we had been, here. And it turns out, actually, California is on pace to meet the number of lawsuits if they keep up this pace. But we're not hearing about it. And partially that's a media question. I do look at this as my vantage point of having been at the LA Times, which very much presented itself as well as a foil to Trump. I mean, I mentioned in the column, we were selling these T-shirts that said, "We will not shut up." I actually have one in here. I could pull it out and show you in all of the different languages spoken by the newsroom after getting kicked out of a White House briefing, similar to what you're seeing with the Associated Press fight with the White House currently. So there was this real opposition feeling. And then the editorial board started a series called Our Dishonest President, which they turned into a book, which they sold for profit. This was all in the first 100 days of the Trump administration. And then what I was doing is I was overseeing California politics, our digital platforms on all political coverage, but especially kind of Sacramento's response to Trump. And you had a lot of differences. The primary one is that California Governor Jerry Brown, fearless, was at the end of his career, at the end of a second time as governor, and he really took a stand on environmental issues. He had spent his whole, second time in the governor's office building up California as a state which would have clean air, clean water, electric vehicle mandates, and so on, that he was going to fiercely protect. And so he charged Javier Becerra former member of Congress who replaced Kamala Harris as Attorney General because she had just been elected to the Senate in 2017. She had just taken office. And Becerra just systematically looked at everything that they knew the Trump administration would challenge and prepared legal, defense of it, and then also went out and challenged the Trump administration. So it's actually kind of happening now on a few different fronts. Birthright citizenship was the first one. We joined on with a bunch of other states. We're parties to other briefs of other states that are suing the Trump administration, and they're trying to protect us. And there's been lawsuits about the research funding, some of these major national issues that are playing out. But a couple things have happened. It doesn't feel like the targets are directly at California yet. Everybody I talk to is anticipating that will come. You have the fires, which have really complicated things because we need money in Southern California to rebuild, to clear some of the regulation, to allow people in these two huge, very different fire areas to kind of come back. But then you also have, frankly, what seems like a lack of courage. Even Governor Gavin Newsom, who has never been shy about criticizing Trump as a candidate or as president, has been quite muted. And so that's what I ended up focusing on. Even though we're on pace to maybe sue the Trump administration as many times, you're not hearing about it. And really, there wasn't much of a protest movement. This last weekend kind of reshaped that a little bit. And I'm actually going to be covering for my next column, Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are coming to LA on Saturday. Neil Young's going to play. It's got a big vibe, and they're expecting, record turnout there.
Where I'm just curious because Bernie and AOC have been sort of a draw. They've it's been kind of amazing showing up in Iowa and getting tens of thousands of people. But with Neil Young also, there's a lot of aging baby boomers that want to hear Harvest Moon.
Yeah, absolutely
Where's the venue?
It's Grand Park, which you see,
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a protest spot, and then also people will go on the streets of LA, and it's quite convenient to public transit, which is what they're encouraging people. That's what I'll do from Burbank.
Wow. All right. I'm glad you mentioned, Becerra, just he was a longtime member of the House. He was a, member of House leadership, part of Nancy Pelosi's, sort of close knit, group of leaders just outside of the core of herself and Steny Hoyer and Jim Clyburn. He had made some moves about okay, where am I going to go from here to kind of be, Ways and Means chairman, which has a jurisdiction over a lot of tax policy. And then, decided actually maybe statewide office in California is the way to go. And had the opportunity to be the AG for California, as you mentioned, after Kamala Harris,
and then he won election to the position 2 years later.
And so he had, a statewide platform. It's all right. Is that your lights going in and out? we actually had this, and you can leave this in, Alan. In last week's edition, everything was going kind of swimmingly in the TV studio, and then the lights went out. So we had to stop, and go press the button because it wasn't a motion thing. It just, for some reason, they just went out.
Yeah, classic.
But this is where podcast magic is made, right? And now Becerra is running for. He was HHS secretary, which gave him also, a platform, particularly with Republican criticism of, the Biden administration and its health initiatives and so forth. And during the, sort of the ramping down of the COVID pandemic, he was HHS secretary, took a lot of arrows, if you will, from Congress, but now he's gone back to California again and is pursuing a run for governor. And as you mentioned in your column, he's kind of wearing the 123 lawsuits filed as a badge of honor, and in a not super subtle, light criticism of his primary opponent, Katie Porter, former Congresswoman Katie Porter, who lost a bid for the Senate last year, and she's running and is a pretty formidable opponent, saying I want to talk about what I've done, not just what I would do.
Right. Yes. So he's pointing to that. And look, the guy has a ton of experience
Right.
and he does have deep friendships in California. This is going to be a really interesting race. He's also, we should point out, when I got him on the phone, I had been trying to interview him for a couple of weeks because I knew I had this idea. And then he announced the run for governor. I was like, okay, now I really have to talk to him. And I was able to do it. But I said to him, look, I'm not going to ask you about Kamala Harris because that's what all of the press coverage here in California had focused on. If Kamala Harris runs for governor, several candidates, including Katie Porter, have said they would not run. So in this case, Becerra is saying, I would run. This has nothing to do with Kamala Harris. This has to do with me and my record. So I said, I'm not going to ask you about that. That's overcovered. But this is, should she get in, that's going to be fascinating. It's already an interesting race. I'm thinking about this for a future column. Katie Porter learned the hard way how you can manipulate California's top two primary. Adam Schiff, rather than spend $30 million in a Democrat versus Democrat race that he was going to win anyway, spend $10 million elevating a Republican so that he didn't have to do that. And that's going to be a playbook from here on out. Like, he proved that it's possible. And she's quite shrewd. She can raise the money. It wouldn't shock me if she tries to do that herself or if any of these Democratic candidates do. So we've got a long way to go before we know what this field really looks like in this, strange top two system that we have here. There's a Republican down in Riverside who is a Trump favorite. He's been, quite prominent. He's very much like in the Trump Joe Arpaio mode, sheriff guy. And I have a feeling we're going to be hearing a lot more about him.
And also, there's just an infinite number of retired Dodgers and Padres, that the Republican Party can tap into, like Steve Garvey. Not that all Major League Baseball players are Republicans, but it does tend to skew kind of conservative. Major League Baseball has is I think arguably one of the more conservative, at least among the players, and especially compared to say like the NBA, or something. Anyway. You also talked to, some of the other members of Congress. I mean, going past like the kind of the politics, the state level politics, and the upcoming governor's race. You talked to some members of the House. California is, I think it's kind of fascinating, like how for so long the politics and the seats were sort of static. They were like, it was almost like they were imprinted, in stone. And then, people started retiring. Some people died. Some people ran for higher office, didn't make it. And you just have this like new wave of members who have been, there for, anywhere from like 2 to 8 or 10 years. And Representative Sydney Kamlager-Dove, like you talk to her, and she just strikes me as this very interesting, person, because this is somebody who doesn't really have to worry that much about losing an election, right? But she also seems very savvy about how she's using her limited time and political capital. It's not just preaching to the choir. It sounds like she's taking her message about like why she disagrees with Trump, or why California needs to be left alone as a state, or needs certain things from the federal government and other things to swing districts and places like that. And this is somebody who, represents, again, a comfortably Democratic Los Angeles based district. And she's going out on the road, kind of like AOC.
Yeah. So she is the member of Congress for my students here at USC, right? She represents this area. It's Karen Bass's former seat, now our mayor. And she's always been good talking to the students. So I've always kind of, liked her vibe and stuff. And then obviously she walked out of the non-State of the Union presidential address earlier this year. So I've been paying attention to what she's been doing, and she started, am I allowed to cuss on this?
Yeah, absolutely. You know me, I'm pro profanity.
Is this shit legal series that she's been doing on social media, smart vertical video to get young people engaged. But so I called her, and also Laura Friedman, who is my member of Congress. The reason I targeted both of them is actually because they both were in the state house under Trump. So Kamlager-Dove was only there for a little bit of Trump, but Laura Friedman had been there for a really long time. And so I wanted to kind of compare, what is Sacramento doing now? We're not hearing as much about it, even though Newsom signed this $50 million to be able to fight these lawsuits. Is pretty muted, and there's just not a lot of action. And I wanted to get them to compare it. So I never heard back from Friedman's office, unfortunately, but Kamlager-Dove, basically said, look, the situation was really different. We had a huge surplus then. We had, the people on our side because Trump had not won the popular vote. And now we have this situation of the fires and, kind of these bigger picture problems, but people are ready. And she says that everywhere she goes, she had actually a very extensive stories about Republicans she said are coming to her events saying like, I regret voting for Trump, or people who are trying to talk to their Republican friends. Like, she was telling me like people that are like peeling the Trump stickers off their bumpers and things like that. And she hinted that really this is going to be an aggressive move too. If Republicans won't hold town halls, the Democrats will go to these swingy districts and do it for them there, which to me seems like a pretty smart political strategy. If they can get attention, and particularly if you're going into places like Orange County, where some of these races were pretty close, and the Democrats, again, if they can get good candidates and people who are active, they might have a really good shot in 2026 in the midterms.
Yeah, and worth noting in California, it's there aren't a lot of like super solid Republican districts. I mean, there's a few, but the majority, really, when you talk about a 220, 215 House, if you have like 5 to 7 Republicans representing districts that are like R+1, R+2 in Orange County and Riverside and places like that, that's the margin. I mean, they won some of those districts in 2022. They lost a couple of them this time around, and lo and behold, like they've got a closer margin. It's kind of the same thing with like, parts of the Hudson River Valley and
Right.
suburban New York, where you get the right candidate who can connect with a swing district. They'll listen. They'll vote for a Republican. They'll vote for a Democrat, even though the state overall is overwhelmingly Democratic. And so, yeah, I mean, going to Orange County, I mean, I really do think that the road to the majority in the House of Representatives is paved through Orange County and Westchester County.
Mhm.
I mean, that's basically it. I mean, there just aren't that many other districts anymore. I mean, I always find it amusing that Democrats think that like, Ryan Fitzpatrick in Philadelphia, that they can, finally, knock him off. And it's like, no, just give up. He's been there for like too long. His constituents obviously like him, even if they're voting for a Democrat at the presidential level.
That's where I go with Young Kim, though. Like she's quite popular. People do like her, and from what I've heard, she's good with constituent services. And so the longer you go, I mean, look at David Valadao, right? Like he's already lost a seat and then come back, and then he actually like wasn't super pro-Trump and managed to like have this place in the House that probably, the longer it is, that's kind of how inertia works with these seats. So the person I'm really looking at is Ken Calvert. Right. He is
Palm Springs,
one of the luckiest members of Congress. And he didn't even come to the big rally that Trump did in Indio, which was it was like late October. We were just leaving Arizona, the students and I covering that. And Calvert didn't even show up. And yet, he still managed to benefit from all of that. And I just will be surprised if he's able to hang on to that seat.
In California, like I remember, like we wrote about this a little bit in Roll Call that, Harris's margins went down in California. I think Trump won about 38 and change percent in California, which was a steady rise from where he was in 2016 and 2020. I think it was like 31 or 33 in those. So he was gaining. But if that's just anecdotally, if people are coming up to not moderate Democrats necessarily and saying like, yeah, it suggests that there may have been some throwaway votes there in California. Before we get too long in the tooth on the podcast, though, I have to ask you about Gavin Newsom's podcast. The podcast talking about podcasts, right? That could be a new podcast about podcasts about podcasts. He's taken some flack for. I mean, you mentioned that he had been largely kind of deferential to Trump, particularly when Trump visited California. I mean, kind of understandable when the place is on fire or in ashes, and you need billions of dollars to rebuild. Just on a rudimentary level.
Right.
Never mind restoring Pacific Palisades or Altadena to the state that they were in before. This is just to get like passable roads,
right? Soil that is usable, yeah.
So that's understandable that he's not Mr. Rootin' Tootin', Yosemite Sam resistance guy. But what do you think of the podcast in terms of like him? He just took so much shit for talking to Steve Bannon and talking to Charlie Kirk. Now, as we were talking off mic as we were getting ready to come on here, that he's also talked to Tim Walz, the vice presidential nominee, in 2024, and Kamala Harris's running mate. So it's not like he's just going all in and he's going to look like Zuckerberg with a chain and like some sort of mesh T-shirt or something like that, and Ezra Klein. So he's talking to a lot of different people. But what do you make of what Newsom's doing? I mean, he obviously has. I would not be surprised if he runs for president at some point.
Right. So I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I moved to California. I left DC it's now been 10 years, and I got here and I had like a pretty low opinion of Newsom. I knew him a little bit because he had been a top Hillary Clinton surrogate in 2008, and I covered that race really closely and interviewed him several times and observed him on the campaign trail. And I was like,
and this is when he was lieutenant governor, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't even think he was lieutenant governor yet.
Was he AG?
He might have still been. No, he was mayor of San Francisco. I can't remember what he
that's right. Yeah.
But in that period of time.
Yeah.
But actually then when I met him, I had to work with him extensively at the LA Times. I was proven wrong. This is somebody, he does have a lot of substance. He can talk about any topic on the fly. Very, obviously charming, affable, all of that everybody knows, but also like he is intelligent and he can engage and he knows the policy and he's totally fearless and he'll talk to anybody. And so over the years,
do you get criticized? You think, does he get a knockdown because he's good looking and rich? Is that part of the problem?
Totally. And like the hair and, so he starts this podcast and the headline that comes out of it is Newsom says trans athletes are deeply unfair to women's sports. One went and I listened to it. So one is with Charlie Kirk. It's an hour and 10 minutes. They argued extensively about like what the Democrats stand for. He actually argued on the trans issue in favor of the rights and, goodwill for these people who are being targeted by the Trump administration. And the one thing about athletes was actually taken out of context in all of these headlines. And the Democrats, and not just Democrats, people on the left and the far left are furious at him. And I was pissed at him, honestly. But when you listen to it, oh, wait, that's not exactly what he said. But you know who didn't bother to correct him? Anybody? Gavin Newsom, because to him, it does help shore him up on this other side. And so I keep getting pushed in my Facebook feed, the sponsored link to his podcast from his PAC, and all the comments from just everyday people and all the comments on Spotify, 90% of them are like, thank you so much. Really glad you're talking to the other side. This is what we need to do, blah, blah, blah. So I think the dude thinks he knows what he's doing. Whether it's going to prove true, I don't know. This is a battle for the soul of the party, as always.
Right.
But so then when I started to listen to it, so he gets in all these arguments with Charlie Kirk. I couldn't listen to the Steve Bannon one. That guy is not a serious person and unfortunately has a lot of power in this world. I'm just going to say that out loud. But I listened to Tim Walz. I listened to Ezra Klein, and he's really deeply engaging on policy. And the Ezra Klein one was particularly interesting because Ezra's new book kind of looks at some of the failings of Democratic policy. And they go through really wonky stuff from Barack Obama.
California high-speed rail,
infrastructure and grids and stuff. And Newsom is able to talk about it while also defending the state a little bit. And so it's an engaging podcast. And I think it's probably in his mind, he's made the calculation that this is going to be smart for him to be having these conversations. In the end, this week he has on Anthony Scaramucci, and it's just kind of you're platforming people. What's the point? And I don't know. But where I do get gut checks from these students, I kind of point down here because I've got 30 students down on the floor there. Newsom was on the right side of gay rights long before the rest of the party. Bernie Sanders can claim that. And Gavin Newsom can claim that. And I will never forget covering the Kerry campaign in 2004. And the National Democrats were furious with Newsom for issuing those marriage licenses. He was going to wreck it. You're going to hand the election to Bush. And they blamed him in a lot of cases for that. And he was right. And he knew that it was the right thing to do. And that's sort of been proven. And I wonder if in a national primary, that's going to help him a lot to be able to make that moral case of why he's always been on the correct side of that. And he actually, the other thing, Charlie Kirk, gave him a bunch of grief about the whole thing at the restaurant in Napa during COVID, where he was dining inside without a mask and all of that. And he said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever done. And I know that, and I'm going to acknowledge that, and I'm going to have to say that multiple times. And so he's very self-aware, I think. Right. And it's going to be fascinating. And he and Harris, they have all the same advisors. They're close. I'm very just kind of interested to see how the two of them interact with one another for the
Right.
next bit of time here.
I am too. I mean, I think I don't have a lot of exposure to Newsom just because I haven't been, in California as much, and up front with where you were. But like from covering on the trail, and I'm not trying to dig on Kamala Harris at all, but my impression from watching her campaign unfold a little bit in Iowa in 2019, and then watching her on the trail, last year, and watching Newsom and what Newsom is doing, now, is that he's got a little bit more retail savvy, with voters, and not just voters, not just like being able to calculate like, oh, this is who I need to talk to, but I mean, for somebody who is, again, like a good looking rich guy from, who was mayor of San Francisco, to be able to parlay that into actual power, and to make those attempts, to make those overtures, to talk to people like Kirk, to talk to people like Bannon, it is, I mean, I can't help but think that somebody in the Harris camp is saying, like, if only we would have gone on Rogan's podcast. Like,
Yeah,
how, like,
absolutely.
would that have made the difference in Arizona? Would that have made the difference in Pennsylvania or something like that? To like sit there, because why give Trump 3 hours, with Rogan, and there's
Yep.
no rebuttal to you. And again, it's not like Rogan is some dyed in the wool super duper conservative. He was a Bernie bro,
Right.
like, I mean, he's an interesting. I mean, like, I can't sit that long and listen to podcasts that long. I have to break it up. It's like watching a Soviet era movie sometimes, with some of these 3-4 hour podcasts.
Mhm.
But like, he's interesting, and he's interested in what people are saying, and giving them the opportunity to talk themselves in or out of like, situations. I mean, the Musk podcast that Rogan did is kind of fascinating look into
Right.
Musk's mind. And I mean, that's just smart to me, like that if Democrats in particular, if they want to continue to be a national party, they have to figure out a way to connect with voters who didn't go to college, the people who wouldn't normally, who are not glued to MSNBC, and reading the New York Times and listening to NPR.
I was
It's not enough.
Yeah, I was having a fascinating conversation with a colleague, a retired professor yesterday. She's probably 25 years older than I am, about Vietnam, and how actually like that sort of working class and poor people, like that's a place where the Democratic Party like really forged so much of its fire, and then now you've gotten really far from that. And
Right.
where are all these things going to come together? And then we get back to the debates about populism, and that's one reason why I'm interested in going to the Sanders thing, just to kind of see. Like, I covered him quite a bit in 2020, in Iowa and other places, and he's still got a lot of support here in California. And so I'm, is he anointing the next generation? I don't know. I'm curious, and I always hesitate to make an assessment unless I've actually seen it up close with my own reporter brain.
Yeah. I should also note too that, like, I think that Republicans, maybe this is changing a little bit in the last couple of weeks because they've hit a few speed bumps in controlling all the levers of power in Washington, but they're just as susceptible to being in a bubble and cutting themselves off from independence, in the political ecosystem. Because I mean, if you really look at exit polling, if you look at how the vote came down, I mean, it was independents worried about the economy who elected Donald Trump president, and returned a Republican majority in the House, and built a Republican majority in the Senate. A lot. I mean, granted, the map is a little, throws things off with the Senate, but I mean, Trump didn't like activate a bunch of like MAGA, to put him over the top. They were already there. They're not going anywhere.
Right.
The people that he got to vote for him, like, were people who were like, wow, Joe Biden looks 1,000 years old. And then also like, wow, like, eggs are incredibly expensive, and I'm tired of this. I feel like crap, like I have this COVID, pandemic economic hangover, and Trump seems decisive, and he said like he's gonna lower prices, and he's gonna take care of inflation and all this kind of stuff. Those are the people that put him over the top. And just talking to people on Newsmax or OAN or super conservative podcasts is not going to be.
Yeah.
It has its limitations just as much as people in a liberal bubble. So.
Yeah.
Well, Christina, thank you so much. Like for writing this great column. I love having your perspective in California. Particularly with your not just your political reporter hat, but also like you're seeing these students that you've let loose on the world,
Right?
and how they approach it and how they view it, and they're like, I'm curious what they think of Bernie Sanders, because I can guarantee you they all know who he is.
Sure do.
He's somebody who like goes, cuts across cuts through a lot of political and pop culture. So do you want to stick around for the word of the week?
Sure.
Great. So the word of the week this week is pairing. We heard a little bit about this because there was a debate in the House of Representatives about proxy voting. Proxy voting was used, but members were able to cast votes on behalf of their colleagues during the pandemic. It was a way to, it was used as a way of cutting down the number of people who were in the House chamber. There are some people who felt that it was abused a little bit because people were just going home early, and or maybe they were golfing or something. They just wanted to not be at the House, and who can blame them most of the time because of what's going on. So proxy voting was halted when the Republicans came back into the majority in 2023, but a number of people have said like there should be exceptions and that people should be able to vote by proxy, particularly young parents. And so this was a standoff over with a couple of younger members who just had children recently. Anna Paulina Luna, a Republican from Florida, was helping lead a discharge petition, bringing legislation to the floor to try to bring proxy voting back for young parents for 12 weeks. This stalled everything in the House for a little while. And actually made the Speaker of the House cancel all votes because he couldn't move until this was resolved. So the way that they resolved it this week was they returned to they're not going to do proxy voting, but they're returning to a practice that never really caught on because it was just kind of weird. It's called pairing. It's so old that when they reinstituted it, you have to go back to like kind of old congressional dictionaries to find out what it is. So one of the easier ways, there's a lot on it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in general, I'll read an older from the 90s dictionary about how it was constituted. It was later, banned for the most part in the House because it was getting, just kind of out of hand, and it was always an informal thing. But here's what it was. Pair. Two members on opposite sides of an issue who agree to be absent when it comes to a vote so that their absence has no effect on its outcome.
Oh.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Yeah. In a live pair, a member who has voted in the affirmative announces he or she is withdrawing the vote and pairing with member X, who would have voted in the negative. Thus, each member states a position. Their pair is listed after the vote as paired for and against. In a general, so it basically they cancel each other out. That you find someone who's going to vote the opposite way as you, and they agree to they're there, but they're not going to vote, so that you basically cancel.
It's forcing you to talk to the other party. I kind of like that.
Well, we'll get to that in a sec. So there's another type of pairing. In a general pair, members who expect to be absent notify the clerk that they wish to make a general pair with an opposing member who is also absent. Their names are listed in the congressional record, but not their positions, which is, again, like, why? Right? Because they're just not there, and if you're not going to note how you were going to vote, like, why bother?
Yeah.
In a specific pair, their positions are identified and noted in the congressional record. With questions requiring, this is where it gets kind of interesting and the math comes out. With questions requiring a 2/3 majority, such as an override attempt of a veto, members also can be paired according to rules of the House of Representatives, 2 in the affirmative, 1 in the negative, or vice versa. So how this came down is it was a little different in the House and Senate. In the House, up until late 90s, early 2000s, I can't remember exactly, there were actually pairing clerks. There were people in the different cloakrooms who could help arrange these things. It was always sort of an informal thing. In the Senate, the leadership staff did it. And I think that sometime in the last couple of years, we had a pair where somebody was not able to attend either because they had COVID or whether they just couldn't get there. And so they were paired with somebody who was opposite their position, and they announced it on the floor. And the leadership goes ahead and arranges that. So that's the way it was in the past. It was done away with, even though, again, it was informal. This dates to like the British House of Commons, by the way, in the 18th century, this practice.
It's just so classic Congress knowledge. I love it.
But one way that you could do a version of it, and it wasn't really called pairing, is if a member was absent, sometimes they will enter into the record, I was absent for this vote, but I would have voted this way, and it just becomes part of the congressional record. So what happened this week as a compromise is that the speaker worked it out with Anna Paulina Luna that they would revive pairing in a more formal way, so that the clerk would actually read it, and it would also go in the record. So it's a very short resolution. This didn't actually. This is my favorite thing. This is a different words of the week. This was deemed and passed. It was actually not voted on specifically. It was part of a rule that was adopted.
I remember that. We used to call it Demon Pass.
Demon Pass, yeah. DMLN. So this is the text. It's a very short of House Resolution 293. So this is just an internal rule of the House of Representatives. Announcement of pairs from a written list furnished to the clerk. During the 119th Congress, that's the one we're in now, pairs shall be announced by the clerk immediately before the announcement by the chair of the result of a vote by the House or the Committee of the Whole from a written list furnished to the clerk, signed by the member making the statement to the clerk, which list shall be published in the congressional record as part of the proceedings, immediately following the names of those not voting. However, pairs shall be announced but once during the same legislative day. So I guess one of the big differences is the clerk will now read these and announce these on a so that it's everybody knows who you're pairing with. It hasn't really it didn't really make all the young parents all that happy, because this is still a vote that you don't get to vote still.
Yeah.
But your vote is, you basically balance it out with a vote like pairing.
Not influencing it. And I guess, but is that just, I know I'm taking my family to Tahiti for the week, so I'm going to go find a Democrat over there who's like also on spring break?
So it's not very specific. And I think that this is, as we were talking about in the newsroom before this, because I was like going through, I'm like, so what's the difference? Like, this is still not like, you're still not voting. And for CQ, our vote studies, it won't be reflected, like, whether you were in a pair or whether, or it may eventually, we may eventually record how many people are in pairs, but not like how they would vote or how it would have changed the vote or not. So it's not clear. It's almost like they didn't quite think it all the way through, but maybe that's just one man's opinion. Anyway, that's the word of the week. Pairing.
I love it.
One last thing that I like to end on a good thing. So, in the coming week or weeks, Christina, what are you looking forward to?
Oh, gosh. Well, I get to lead 12 USC students on what we call a Maymester. So it's a 2-week semester traveling somewhere. And this one is a career trek. And that means we get to expose students to careers and visits to different organizations. And we're going to Washington, D.C. So I get to come and hopefully be right there in that office.
Yes, where all the magic happens.
Get to show them, for all of its flaws, I still recommend Washington to young people, right? It was great for me coming up in my career. I'm really glad I don't live there now with my family, in all honesty, for lots of reasons. But this is a good opportunity for them. And if they can pursue it and come, they can make friends, they can rise quickly, they can work hard, they can learn a lot. And also the skill sets that they have here, they don't have to be journalists, right? They can be communicators or speech writers or PR people or lobbyists. There's just so many different ways that they can use what they've developed here for good in Washington on whatever side they happen to be on or issue that they are passionate about. And you can live there and have a good time. And so I'm excited about it. It'll be really fun. And we've got a whole bunch of visits. So if I call, whoever's listening to this podcast, if I call you and ask you to meet with 12 people, it's for the future. The
It's
next
for the future.
generation, please.
And
Yeah.
at a minimum, we will show them. We'll show them the glass cage of motion in the roll call newsroom, and also the television studio where we are starting to do more podcasts. I am looking forward to something more sports, physical fitness oriented. For the first time in years, I'm going to run a race longer than 5K.
Okay.
You and I have run in the ACLI Capital Challenge
Coming up soon, right?
yeah, which is coming up in May. This coming weekend in Delaware is the Delaware Coastal Running Festival. My wife, your friend Fawn Johnson, she'll be running the half marathon. It starts on the boardwalk on Rehoboth Avenue, goes out to Cape Henlopen State Park, and comes back. We'll wave to Biden and Tony Kornheiser and all the different people who live in Rehoboth Beach or have places there, and then comes back to the boardwalk. And there's a marathon, a half marathon, and a 9K on Sunday. The 5K is on Saturday. I ran the 5K last year. I'm running the 9K this year because I just had some serious FOMO, when Fawn would take off, and I'd just be like, okay, I got 2 hours to kill now. So I'm not fast and I'm not sleek, but I think I can do it. This past couple weeks ago, I actually was able to do a full 9K. I've been tapering a little bit, but I'm feeling pretty good about it. My knees have not completely rebelled. So I'm looking forward to that. And also, one of the things I really like about this running festival is that for those of you who know Atlantic coast beaches, it's never going to be quite as nice as Los Angeles and San Diego and those beaches in a lot of ways. But Delaware beaches in particular have grotto pizza. And part of the entry fee for the race is that the after party is not just a tent, it's a grotto pizza, and it involves all you can eat pizza and pasta and beer and a couple of beers.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a really good time.
Yeah. It's as opposed to the cherry blossom run. So Fawn ran that this past weekend, the 10 miler, which is thousands of people. I mean, it just sort of takes over the National Mall. It's an amazing race, and she had a great time and so forth. But that really does sort of take over. They have all these celebrities, people, from the running world there. This is like a few hundred people. It's kind of awesome. It's small and it's fun, and I have a soft spot.
Yeah.
For
I love
Rehoboth.
it.
So
it's not this weekend, but next weekend.
No, it's this weekend.
Oh, it
this
is.
weekend.
Okay.
Yeah, in a few days. So
be safe, have fun.
I will. All right, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in real life, in person, in May. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners. We'll catch you next time on the next Political Theater.